Desperation led me straight to Chino. My business was crumbling, debt suffocating me, and he was my last resort. Unlike typical loan sharks, he exuded eerie confidence, impeccable suits, polished shoes, and an office hidden behind an old brick building. Inside, wealth and decay coexisted, luxurious leather chairs, antique clocks ticking too precisely, but the air carried a damp metallic scent that sent a chill through me. "I can offer you a solution," he murmured, his voice as smooth as silk yet empty of warmth. "But nothing in this world comes without a cost." I should have run then. I should have turned my back and let the business die a natural death. But instead, I nodded. We shook hands. His fingers were cold, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones. The money arrived quickly. It felt like a miracle until the first repayment was due. The interest was suffocating, and no matter how much I paid, the debt seemed to grow. When I missed a payment, Chino's demeanor shifted. The polished veneer cracked, revealing something unsettling beneath. "I don't tolerate failure," he whispered during our next meeting. His eyes seemed darker, the room colder. "If you can't pay with money, I'll take something else." I laughed it off, but as I left his office, shadows seemed to cling to me. My luck turned sour. Appliances broke down, clients vanished, and my health declined. I started seeing things, shapes in the corners of my vision, whispers in empty rooms. One night, as I lay in bed, I felt a pressure on my chest. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. A figure stood at the foot of my bed, tall, gaunt, with hollow eyes and a twisted grin. It leaned in close, its breath ice against my skin. "Payment is due," it rasped. I woke up drenched in sweat, but the bruises on my chest were real. I knew then that Chino's price wasn't just financial. He was taking pieces of me, draining my life bit by bit. Desperation led me to a local historian. I told him about Chino, and his face turned white. "That building used to be a bank," he said. "Chino Russo was a loan officer there in the 1920s. When the stock market crashed, he turned to loan sharking. People who couldn't repay, they disappeared. He died in that office, shot by a desperate debtor." "That's impossible," I muttered. "I've seen him, I spoke to him." "Maybe you did," the historian whispered, "but Chino's debtors always pay, one way or another." When I returned to the office, it was abandoned. Dust-coated furniture, shattered windows, and that same metallic smell, now unmistakably blood. Chino's portrait hung on the wall, his eyes following me, his grin widening. I ran, but my debt followed. My health deteriorated, my reflection grew gaunt, and sleep offered no refuge. Every night, the figure returned, leaning closer, whispering reminders of what I owed. The days became a blur. I lost my job, friends avoided me, and even my family began to look at me with fear. I'd find strange marks on my skin, scratches and bruises that appeared overnight. I tried to move away, to run, but every town felt colder, every shadow longer. Chino's influence stretched far beyond his office. I searched for help everywhere. Priests, mystics, therapists, each one listened, their concerns shifting to fear before they ultimately turned me away. It was as if Chino's influence seeped into my very being, corrupting everything I touched. No one wanted to be near me. No one dared to help. I know my time is running out. This story is all I have left, a final warning to anyone desperate enough to follow the path I did. Never accept a loan from Chino Russo, because what he takes isn't just money. It's your mind, your soul, your very existence. And when the debt comes due, no place on earth will keep you safe. Desperation clouded my judgment, making the loan seem like a lifeline rather than a noose. The banks had turned their backs on me, and when a friend suggested someone who could help, I jumped at the chance. His name was Victor, but on the streets they called him the Shroud. Back then I laughed at the nickname. Now it haunted me. At first everything seemed fine. I made my payments, but the interest climbed like ivy, tightening around my throat. No matter how much I paid, the debt never shrank. The calls started soon after, soft, measured voices reminding me of my obligations. They were polite at first. Then, one night, I stepped outside to find my car windows shattered. Across the windshield, a single word was smeared in something thick and dark: pay. I didn't need to ask what it was. I started staying home, drawing the curtains tight, living off the glow of my phone screen. I'd hoped hiding would make me invisible. Instead, it made me a target. It was a rainy Thursday night when I heard it. The soft, unmistakable crunch of gravel just outside my window. The steady rhythm of raindrops against the glass had lulled me into a fragile sense of calm, but that sound shattered it in an instant. My pulse quickened, a drumbeat in my ears. I reached for the remote and turned off the TV, plunging the room into darkness. The dim blue glow of the screen faded, and shadows crept in, filling every corner. My breathing slowed, each breath a shallow whisper against the oppressive silence. But the sound came again, a deliberate, unhurried step on the gravel. It wasn't the casual scuffle of a stray cat or the wind nudging a loose stone. It was human. Someone was out there. My feet moved before I made a conscious decision. I slid across the cold, hardwood floor, pressing myself against the wall just beside the window. The blinds were half closed, their thin plastic slats offering only fractured glimpses of the outside world. I edged them apart with 2 fingers, just enough to see but not be seen. At first, my eyes struggled against the rain-blurred darkness, but then I saw them, 3 figures standing motionless at the edge of my yard. Their bodies were draped in long, dark coats, the hoods pulled low over their faces, obscuring their features. They stood shoulder to shoulder, perfectly still, like mannequins left out in the storm. I waited for them to move, to speak, to do anything, but they remained statuesque, their heads slightly tilted as if studying my home. A chill threaded through me, and I backed away from the window, my feet brushing against the rug, my breath coming in short, uneven bursts. I fumbled for my phone, my hand trembling. The screen lit up, casting harsh white light into the room, and my thumb scrambled over the icons, but my grip slipped. The phone flew from my hand, arcing through the air before crashing onto the floor. The clatter was impossibly loud, a gunshot in the silence. I froze, my ears straining. Outside, the figures reacted. Their heads snapped toward the sound, and then, in unison, they moved. A dark silhouette slid past the window, a smudge against the rain-streaked glass. Another shadow moved through the backyard, slipping between the twisted branches of the old oak. I was surrounded. The doors were locked, but I knew they wouldn't hold. My only chance was the basement window leading to the alley. I crept downstairs, each step groaning under my weight. The basement swallowed me in darkness as I fumbled for the window latch. My fingers found the cold metal, but it wouldn't budge. It was as if the night itself had trapped me, sealing my fate. A crash upstairs. Glass shattered. Heavy boots thudded against the floor. I could hear them whispering, a low murmur like insects crawling through the walls. They called my name, softly at first, then louder. My blood turned to ice. I shoved the window harder, my palms slick with sweat. It moved, just an inch, but it was enough. I wriggled through, my back scraping against the frame, my shirt catching on a rusty nail. I dropped into the alley, the wet ground shocking against my palms. I ran. I didn't look back. I left everything, my wallet, my phone, my past. I moved 2 states over, found a job under a different name. I rented a room in a crumbling motel where the walls were thin and no one asked questions. I took night shifts at a 24-hour diner, my days spent in a sleepless haze, always waiting for the soft crunch of gravel outside my door. But every night, as I lay on the stiff, stained mattress, I hear them. Soft footsteps outside my door, slow, deliberate. I thought I had escaped, but paranoia gnawed at me. Shadows seemed to stretch and twist. Whispers followed me in empty halls. I found notes under my door. "We found you," scrawled in red ink, or maybe not ink at all. I stopped sleeping. My hands trembled, my eyes sunken and ringed with purple. I started seeing their hoods in crowds on empty streets, in my nightmares. The world blurred, a smear of fear and exhaustion. That night at the diner, everything changed. I was refilling a cup of coffee when I glanced up, and there he was, Victor, the shroud, seated in the last booth, his hood drawn low, fingers drumming an eerie rhythm against the table. Tap, tap, tap. The coffee pot slipped from my hands, shattering on impact. Scalding liquid splashed across my shoes, but I barely noticed. My manager was yelling, his voice warped and distant, like I was underwater. The only sound that mattered was the tapping. I bolted through the back door, slipping on the rain-slick pavement. My breath came in ragged gasps, my legs screaming with every step. But deep down, I knew the truth. I couldn't outrun them. Now, crouched in a damp alley, my hands trembling, I hear them. Footsteps. Measured. I never imagined desperation would drive me straight into the hands of Vincent Viper Moretti. His name carried a weight of whispered warnings, a shadow that loomed over the city's underbelly. But when my wife's hospital bills stacked higher than I could manage, and every bank turned me away, I convinced myself there was no other choice. I expected a seedy hideout, a back room thick with smoke and bad decisions. Instead, I found a sleek, glass-fronted office with a polished brass plaque that read Moretti Financial Solutions. The place smelled of expensive cologne and freshly brewed coffee, the kind of deception that lulls you into thinking you're safe. A young woman greeted me with a smile, polite, practiced, but hollow. "Mr. Moretti is ready for you," she said, gesturing toward a door that might as well have been the gates of hell. She led me through a corridor lined with abstract art. The walls were an icy white, and the floor was so clean it almost shimmered. When we reached the door at the end, she knocked once and pushed it open. Vincent sat behind a glass desk, wearing a suit that looked like it cost more than my car. His hair was slicked back, and his hands, adorned with silver rings, rested calmly on a stack of paperwork. His smile was warm, almost welcoming. "Mr. Klein, please, have a seat." I sat, my palms sweaty, my throat tight. I explained my situation, how my wife needed surgery, how my insurance barely covered a fraction of the cost. He nodded along, his expression sympathetic. When I finished, he slid a contract across the desk. "It's simple, really. I lend you $50,000, and you pay me back $75,000 over the next year. No hidden fees, no surprises." I hesitated. "That's a lot of interest." He chuckled. "Desperation isn't cheap, Mr. Klein." My hand trembled as I signed without reading the fine print. I just needed the money. He handed me a neat stack of $100 bills, the weight of it both comforting and suffocating. At first, I managed the payments. My wife's surgery was a success, and things seemed okay. But then my work hours were cut, and the payments began to slip until they stopped altogether. When I ignored the calls, they came to my door. Two men, built like refrigerators, stood on my porch. They didn't say much, just handed me a note with an address and a time. I knew better than to ignore it. The address led me to a warehouse on the outskirts of town. The windows were boarded up, and the metal door creaked as I pushed it open. Inside, the air was damp and heavy, and the only light came from a few dim bulbs hanging from the rafters. Vincent stood in the center of the room, his silhouette sharp against the gloom. His warm demeanor was gone, replaced with a cold, unblinking stare. "Mr. Klein, you've been avoiding me." I stammered out an apology, explaining my situation, begging for more time. He listened, his head cocked slightly to the side, like a predator considering its prey. "I'm a reasonable man," he said, pacing around me, "but every kindness has its price." I felt a rough hand on my shoulder, shoving me to my knees. The floor was sticky, and when I looked down, I saw dark stains seeping into the concrete. Blood, old and new. "I'm going to give you an opportunity, Mr. Klein. One chance to make this right." They dragged someone out from the shadows, a man bound and gagged, his eyes wide with terror. I didn't recognize him, but the look on his face told me he knew exactly who Vincent was. "Kill him," Vincent said, tossing a rusted hammer at my feet. "What?" My voice was barely a whisper. "If you want to erase your debt, all you have to do is end his." The room spun. I wanted to run, to scream, but the men behind me closed in, their shadows swallowing me whole. I can't." Vincent sighed, a sound of genuine disappointment. Vincent's men closed in, and the room filled with screams and sickening crunches. When it ended, the floor was slick with red, and I vomited. Vincent knelt beside me, his voice eerily soft. "Every refusal makes the debt grow, Mr. Klein." After that night, my life crumbled. I lost my job, my wife took our daughter, and still, Vincent's men came. I sold everything, but it was never enough. Then, a new note arrived, not an address, but a photo. My daughter in the park, a shadow lurking nearby, Vincent's shadow. Something inside me snapped. I bought a gun, drove to the warehouse ready to end it. But it was empty. He had been expecting me. Now I live on the road, always looking over my shoulder. Shadows flicker in my rearview mirror. Footsteps echo behind me at night. I know he's watching, waiting. My debt was never money, it was my soul.